Welcome to Beacon Bits. I'm your co-host, Serge Boudreau, and every episode I will be joined by my co-host, Yves Boudreau. We delve into the world of work from the employer and employee viewpoint. Kick back, relax, and let's talk work. Beacon Bits starts right now. Welcome to Beacon Bits. I'm your co-host, Serge, joined as always by Yves Boudreau. Yves, how's it going?
It's been a while, Serge. We were on vacation, and I paid the vacation tax, I think, because I got COVID. Again, the worst of all the COVIDs I've had by far.
Yeah, you've been out for like 3 weeks. Like, not out, but you've been complaining about this for 3 weeks. It's been pretty bad, right?
It's been pretty bad.
Hopefully you're on the mend, though, because this morning you had a keynote at Startup New Brunswick, was it?
No, Startup Canada.
Startup Canada. Wow. Yeah. How did it go?
It was good. It was good. I haven't really been public in recent years. I used to be really involved in the community and talk a lot about our journey, and I was hibernating for the last few years.
Running a business?
Yeah, running a business and also just managing my energy and trying to put my time and putting it in the right places. But yeah, I guess managing a business would make sense.
How nervous do you get for these?
I don't really get nervous. What I've noticed, though, is it takes me a bit of time to get my rhythm going at the start. Story of my life. But yeah, I don't really get nervous. I slept like a baby last night. It's also my story. I'm not talking with charts and data points. I'm really just telling our story. So it's a bit different. And the room was a bunch of existing, aspiring entrepreneurs, people in the business community that supports entrepreneurs. And I felt I really wanted to provide a transparent view of what it's really been like. So I had some cool slides showing some of the headlines of our company in the news for various reasons, mostly positive, but also telling the story of what transpired for us to actually get to that point. It was fun. It was great. I had a lot of good feedback. A lot of people felt really thankful because they were struggling with obstacles in their businesses. Because I shared openly about the fact that I went through personal bankruptcy after my first company.
Yeah.
I think that was surprising for a lot of people that I actually put that out there. And 2 people came to me afterwards and told me that it meant a lot to them because they're at that inflection point right now in their lives.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Quite challenging to start a business. You've gone through a lot of ups and downs. What's your process when you have a keynote? Do you prepare the slides? Do you practice? Do you just wing it? What do you do?
I am horrible at preparing those in time. I overthink them, especially this one in this case. I actually spent the weekend looking at archives, and I had to find something that would play DVD so I could find things I did with my first companies because I didn't have anything that I could play DVD. So I just thought about, my PlayStation should probably be able to play it. So I was actually able to find some old stuff that was really cool. But it also gave me a lot of anxiety. Like, it's like opening old wounds that you put on the back burner.
Yeah.
Some of the stuff, like, I felt like super tense yesterday just because going back and revisiting things that really, really difficult periods. But I'm thankful. The more time that goes by, the easier it gets to talk about those things and to look at it with a lot more perspective.
Yeah. I get really nervous for keynotes. And I think it's because I tend to over prepare in some ways and overthink it and change it last minute. Like, I try to perfect it. And like, the best presentations that I've ever done has been when I'm not that prepared for some reason. So I think there's a case for both, right? Like, I guess it depends on what you're doing, the audience, how comfortable you are with the subject, but it's a skill set that everyone should have in business. Is a very challenging one. I think it's the biggest fear in everyone is public speaking. So it's a hard one to overcome, but it's such a great skill set to have.
And I think the best advice I would give to anyone, and not even just speaking publicly, but presenting to a group, instead of looking at yourself and thinking about how you're going to do, think about how the audience is going to perceive it. So what I mean by that is, even today, I actually intentionally skipped a few slides this morning on the fly and shot from the hip a little bit once I realized that the audience was probably one of the youngest audience I've talked to, a lot of underrepresented groups there as well. And I wanted to really paint a picture of some of the challenges. And I shared things that I wasn't planning on sharing originally, but the ability to be able to like move and maneuver on the spot, like based on new data point or new findings, I think that's where you can really excel. But I always just try to have fun with it.
Have fun. I think that is the best advice. Eve, how about we jump into our new
Hmm.
segment called What's Trending in the News? And this week we saw it was all over the internet, all over LinkedIn. Everyone has an opinion. Amazon has announced that pretty much every employee has to return to the office 5 days a week. I'm not surprised. I think this is a trend that we're going to see in the tech space. Here, where I'm based in Calgary, we're starting to see that with oil and gas. It went to 3 days, suddenly four, and now we're starting to see five.
Hmm.
Do you think this is just a new norm? Everyone is going back in the office full time.
Yes,
You think,
I
yeah?
do. I do, but I'm really hoping that it does also mean that other things are not coming back, right? And we talked about this before, where there's a difference between asking people to be there 5 days a week, clocking in and clocking out, versus asking people for their first intentions to want to be at the office, to be part of the team. And if there are things that they need to deal with life or with circumstances, then that there's room and flexibility for those individuals to be able to do what they need to do.
Is it the end of remote work?
It really depends on the types of businesses. I shared this with you before. I think there's some real concern from societal and mental health and other where people are just isolated at home all day and don't have that separation from work and home life and those types of things. And yes, sure, there's some, glorious kind of like versions of remote life where people are working off the beach. But for the reality of people, like they're at the kitchen table with kids in the background or other distractions. And I just don't think that's healthy. But I also think that there is a lot of shitty companies out there. And I hope that doesn't give them permission to be shitty companies again.
Yeah, I think there's a mixture. I don't think it's the end of remote work. There's a lot of companies born out of the pandemic and even probably before that have had remote or are having remote
Mhm.
workforce because part of their strategy is to get the best person that you can get no matter where you are. And I think we're going to keep seeing that, but I think it's going to be way smaller, obviously, than it was a couple years ago. And we're going to see a lot more of these mandates. I just feel bad for people that moved. There's a lot of
Yeah.
companies that said that they were going to be remote for life.
Yeah.
People move
Yes.
to locations that is now far away from the office.
Yes.
What do you do in that particular situation? There's not much. I guess you have to resign and find another company, which just sucks.
Yeah, no, it's not going to be pretty for some people. At the end of it, the companies are entitled and they're making the choice. They're making the decision. They're risking losing good people. But like I said to you before, they're also risking having people who actually want to be in that environment. And those are going to open up opportunities. So I mentioned earlier that I was going back through some archives when I was preparing for this presentation to tell our story over the last 10 years or so. And one of the things that I hadn't looked at it probably in 5 years was our Instagram account for Alongside.
Yeah.
I think it's alongside.hr. If you actually like go through it, that's why people wanted to work here and that's why people wanted to be part of this. And you really feel it when you scroll down through it. It's not people posing for the cameras. There's a really positive vibe. And I don't think you can capture that remotely in bits and pieces, but it's not the same.
Yeah, I agree, but I do think that the world has changed pretty dramatically, and I
Mhm.
think it's still harder to capture that same vibe now. Employees feel different about their employers. There's been a mindset shift that happened during the pandemic, but I guess we'll see. Let's jump into the next what's trending in the news. And this is actually a little bit old, but we haven't received the August job numbers in Canada yet. But I wanted to highlight something from the job numbers that is a little bit scary. It shows that now a quarter of the workforce works for the government. So either federal, provincial, or local.
Mhm.
Doesn't that seem extremely high when you have a quarter of your workforce depending on the government for a paycheck?
Mhm.
The one thing that I was looking at as well when we dig in deeper is there's been a decline of entrepreneurship. A lot less people are starting their own business. They're just going and working for the government. Is this just the government that we have now that's been actively growing departments? Because I saw an article that talked about the CRA and the IRS. So in Canada, we have for every 700 people, we have one person in the CRA working. In the US, it's half that
Yeah.
working for the IRS. Are we just creating jobs to show that the economy is doing better than it is and it's not real? What's your overall thoughts?
It's always been high in Canada. Like, I don't
Yeah.
know what the percentage was before. It probably wasn't a quarter of the population, but it's always been fairly high. I think US is 14.5% of people work for the US government. But you think about the US, obviously the population is way bigger than Canada. So 14%, it's not going to have the same impact as a quarter of Canadians. I mean, it's been so messy. During the pandemic, they threw money left and right at different things to help support people, help people survive, which was the right thing to do. And I think now there's also some scrambling to figure out how to get back on track and reset in some ways. And there was just not enough resources to support those roles. But they also made a bunch of interesting changes during this as well. Like the Canadian government also went full remote. And now they're having conversations around bringing back people in the office, but they've also relinquished a lot of office space during the pandemic.
Yeah.
But my biggest concern is, and I don't want to say this because I know there's some amazing people who work at the government, but as a government, as a unit, it's not necessarily where you get the most innovation and productivity. And so when you have a quarter of your population that is working at the government, then I do believe that might have an impact on Canada's productivity. That's my
Well, I'm glad you brought that up because we have seen a huge decline in the last couple of years of how productive Canadian workers are compared to the US primarily, but also other G7 countries. And we are lagging. We're falling behind.
yeah.
And I don't know if these are interconnected. I'm obviously don't work for the government, don't see what stats can seize, but I can see that having an impact, right? Definitely, like you said, the innovation is not coming from the government. It's from the infrastructure of companies and private sector companies that are really driving it. And there is less of that talent available because
I mean, it should be coming from the private sector. Governments are there to support society, both in business and people in their individual lives. And so, yeah, the last thing you want to do is have your country's innovation coming from government. And so there's some concerns there. I think I want to quickly touch on the startup thing because obviously that's close to my heart. So I saw the same stat. I don't know if it's correlated, but I think there's just more fear. But I know it sounds crazy, but it's like there's so much out there. It's so much saturation. And it's like, okay, how do you stand out? How do you build something? And also, how do you access financing? And it's always been hard, but I think it's harder now, even though it feels like it should be easier.
I don't think it's easier at all. I agree. I think it's way harder because everything is being built on AI or some type of AI capability. And what you're building might not be relevant in 6 months, 12 months, 18 months from now, which we're going to see a lot more of that. So, yeah, I agree. It's way harder to be able to execute a business in this current climate, especially as a startup. Not impossible, though. There are still a ton of great companies
Mm-hmm.
that are being started in every region of Canada, but it's harder. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I just think the velocity expectation of these companies to be at a certain stages, and I'm not just talking tech, I'm talking in general. Like the pace of even 5 years ago is not fast enough anymore.
Yeah, let's keep an eye because the August numbers, job numbers are going to come out. We're definitely
Yeah.
seeing some weaknesses in the Canadian job market. And
Yeah.
there's a lot of people that are more desperate for job and jumping into something I saw on Reddit. And this has been common, right? A lot of folks have been leveraging AI to apply for
Mhm.
jobs in multiple ways, right? There is the lazy AI apply tools that literally you can apply for 1,000 jobs in a day. There's really no limit. And we're also seeing a lot of folks, as we've talked before, take their resume, put it in Chat GPT, and it
Mm.
looks like everyone applying is qualified for the job until you dig in deeper. But I want to use this specific example and what type of comments that came from it and the challenge that we're seeing right now. So this gentleman built a bot called LinkedIn AI Hawk, which scraped job description data from job adverts and use AI to tailor applications. So
Mm.
basically applied for 1,000 jobs, got 50 interviews. So the first thing someone on the comments said is, why didn't you apply for 2,000? You get 100 interviews, right? Getting the interview is not the point. Where I have a deep concern on these tools is we're complaining about candidate experience.
Mhm.
A lot of companies are getting hundreds of applicants of candidates that are not even close to being qualified. And we have these poor recruitment HR departments trying to go all through these resumes to
Mhm.
find one or two that are actually qualified. It is creating so much unwanted noise that it's making the candidate experience worse for everyone. There's more ghosting, it causes all those challenges. So when I see this, I get a little bit frustrated. I'm like, dude, you're actually affecting so many other job seekers that are struggling out there. You're trying to game the system for no reason.
Yeah, I'm going to just come out and say it. I actually hate it. I understand there's a resentment from job seekers over how they've been perhaps treated, especially during the pandemic, but not in every industry, but like in tech, as an example, just cycling through people like cattle and people not really hearing back and being left in the dark. And that's been an internal challenge. But I feel there's some resentment. And like now that there's these tools, it's like, okay, well, that's your problem if you have 1,000 applications to deal with. And it's so weird that we have all these conversations about employers and job seekers in these confrontational settings,
Yeah.
where in reality, this company is trying to give you a meaningful opportunity and you're trying to contribute to this organization in a meaningful way. Yet you're both like not giving an F about each other. It just makes no sense to me.
Yeah, I still have a hard time figuring out how can you even be qualified for 1,000? How is there even 1,000 jobs that you could work in your market? Like, I know American cities are way bigger, like probably New York City, the bigger cities. Yeah, it's a possibility. But
And
like if
remote.
I looked in Moncton, New Brunswick right now, jobs that I actually could do and apply for, there's maybe like 5, 6, 7, right? What's
No,
the point
zero.
of applying? Probably zero, exactly. Like I don't want to spend much time on this, but if you're a job seeker, you got to do what you got to do, but you're not helping. You're actually causing a much bigger challenge. And this goes to employers as well. What are you doing to alleviate this? What's your approach that can be a little bit different? And maybe this is where companies are focusing less on just applications and trying to get more referrals, looking at other ways they can get candidates because they just drown in
Yep.
this mess.
I actually got, I won't name the company. I've been approached by two separate companies in the last like month or so running a job board. And the value proposition was that we could essentially integrate their technology to allow job seekers to essentially apply for multiple jobs on Career Beacon from this technology. And my reply to him was, we will never, ever implement this technology on Career Beacon because we find maybe ways to suggest alternatives and to make it easier for someone, because there's no doubt that people can be qualified for more than one job.
Yeah, totally.
But applying for 1,000 jobs at one click without even looking at the jobs, without even understanding who the company is. And so we're going to find ways to obviously find the sweet spot in the middle. But that value proposition, I was like, I'm actually going to be super direct with you on this one, because you're going to realize really quickly that you're not actually contributing in a positive way to this industry.
No,
Even for job seekers, you're not helping them.
no. Can you name names? No, we're going to hold
I'm
that
not gonna,
back.
I'm not gonna name.
All right, Eve, let's jump into a new segment called The Future of Work.
Yeah, we're going to talk about research that we're looking at that's making predictions over where the industry is going. But let's start with a bit of a troubling report that I saw around the labor market trends that are happening in Canada. Let's stick to Canada. For the first time in a long time, the labor force growth is expected to slow in the coming years compared to any of the recent trends we've had. And most of the scenarios are projecting an annual growth of 0.7%. That's actually like flat. And it's probably even generous, because we all know that a lot of the employment growth is possibly enhanced, I guess we'll say. So, Serge, what do you attribute some of this to? And is this a temporary thing? Like, do you think that this is going to change? Is it ever going to go back to some of the growth trajectories that we've seen in the past?
Well, I think it goes back to what we talk about, how productive we are as a nation, and that has gone down. We have some demographic challenges. We have a lot of people that will be retiring in the next 10 years, which we've known for a long time, and we've seen some hints of it. And the government has been proactive, and I would argue not completely well organized, but bringing a lot of new Canadians who help to fill the gap. Here's the challenge: is we're bringing 1 million people a year, and there's 100,000 jobs that are opening up, and we expect that for the future, because right now by Q4 the unemployment rate is going to be 6.7%, which is as high as we've seen it, especially in the last 15, 20 years. But the concern here is the youth workforce at
Mm-hmm.
12%
Mm-hmm.
unemployment,
Yeah.
and the new Canadian at 18%. There is something going on in the marketplace that I don't think either of us can understand.
Mhm.
It is concerning, and it goes back to what we talked about. There's less entrepreneurs that are starting business, that are creating new jobs that are outside of the government workforce. And like a government change could affect this dramatically. If we have a government change in the next year, I think we're going to see immigration completely slow down or
Mhm.
go back to where it was before. We were known to accept everyone, but it had to be controlled. And this is where the mixture of having a lot of people come in, there's no housing, it's driven the housing pricing to a point where no other G7 countries are even close to our cost of living.
Yeah.
All of this combined, like I hate to be negative, but it's not a good outlook for the Canadian job economy.
Yeah. I'm gonna add two comments on it. I think
Yeah.
you're definitely touching on a lot of the right things. I'm not convinced that the percentage aren't worse, what you've stated.
Why do you think that?
Because you have a lot of part-time employment, you have a lot of employment that is below the line of poverty. The unemployment rate is probably worse than even those numbers, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Because I don't know that I would consider someone who can barely make ends meet as gainfully employed in Canada. So I don't want to also add to the negativity, but I think it's probably even worse than what we're talking about now. And the other thing that's concerning is that following Q4 and Q1 of next year and the following quarters, that there's any kind of catalyst that's going to change that. The other thing that I am concerned about is you mentioned the demographics. I remember working at economic development 15 years ago, and there was a concern over succession planning, the boomer generation that's retiring, and we're not very far away from Gen X hitting the retirement block,
They're starting to, right?
which is
Like
us. You and I are Gen X.
we're the young part of Gen X, but they're 55, 60, and yeah, they're starting to retire as well, which is crazy to think
It's
of.
so scary. Yeah. Yeah.
But okay, we're negative here. So let's
Yeah.
like turn it and be positive in this sense. What can we do as a government, as entrepreneurs, as people in the workforce to flip this around, to be in a better position, to be more competitive? Obviously, we're both not politicians and there's a ton
I
of
am.
data that we don't
I'm dressed like
have.
one today.
You are dressed like one today. But where should we start? You're given the keys to the country, Yves, as the new prime minister, and your goal is to grow the economy. How do you focus here? Where do you focus?
I don't even want to think about it, but I do think it starts with the education system needs to be revamped.
Okay.
I also think that the cost is really prohibitive. I believe that some people are not actually going into a career trajectory that they want to go in because the cost is too prohibitive. And so I think there's things like that that I do believe at the core has to be rethought. I've never been someone who says, hey, government needs to do more government. I'm not that guy, but you talked about the youth employment numbers being 12% and 18% for newcomers in terms of being gainfully employed. There's no doubt that there has to be some stimulation there too. And there are programs that exist, but I don't think that it's enough to really encourage companies to take a chance on young people. And I also think one thing that's missing, and it's going to be super critical, is professional developments have gone out the window. I rarely talk to companies who actually have professional development opportunities. And I
Yeah.
think with everything that's happening with AI, with the generational changes, companies just have to have better resources to support their employees.
There's a couple things that we can do really quickly. We got to figure out our immigration policy and we have to start aligning the
Mhm.
opportunities to immigration we bring in Canada. That has not been the case, right? There's been a big loophole when it comes to schools, right? Student permits. And that has caused a major issue where we let it run loose. And I want to make sure that I'm clear. This is not anyone's fault. This is not newcomers' fault to Canada. They came in under a promise of getting an education. If you do well, you'll be able to stay.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, there's a massive mismatch. And then if we look at that, there's been large incentive for certain companies to hire these types of jobs. And what I'm not hearing youngsters don't want to work anymore. I'm hearing youngsters can't find a job anymore. There's no entry level jobs. And that's
Mhm.
would be one of my first priorities to determine, okay, how do we balance the workforce to be, hey, we're actually filling the needs that we need. Like We need more engineers. Let's get engineers. We don't
Mhm.
need more people working in HR or in sales. We have a lot of those folks that are looking for jobs right here in Canada. But let's start filling the gaps with the type of personnel that we need. Then we need to build a lot of houses. What about construction? What are the incentives to build a lot more? I know there's been a lot of discussions, but I haven't seen any concrete plan that really drives companies to build houses and then to get the workforce to fill it out as well.
Mm.
And the other factor is we need to start investing a lot in automation. I look at Japan as an example, and obviously, we both know Ryan that lives in Japan. The demographics are really interesting there because they've pretty much automated everything. You go in a restaurant, there's one
Yeah.
person, it's a vending machine type of system that works really well.
Yeah.
There's a lot of things that we don't need the workers that we've needed in the past just based on the innovation that's been in marketplace. If I was the government, I'd be investing a ton in entrepreneurs that can bring the innovation that can fix these issues. I know there's different funds out there, and I know the government has somewhat focused on it, but I would put all my resources into organizations and new startups to future proof what we're doing. So I guess I'll never be voted prime minister. I have too many skeletons in my closet.
Yeah.
But I think we definitely need to do something, and holding our government representative accountable is something that we need to do, which doesn't look like that in the current mess we're in right now.
The last thing I'll say is I also think that I don't think that anyone really knows what the solution is because the world has shifted so quickly in terms of like the progression that we've made as people over the last 100 years is insane. And the major milestone jumps or the major like inflection point jumps, like they're just shorter. And I don't know that we're like evolving as quickly as we think we are, as because you just mentioned automation. Automation may not be the best thing for solving this issue. It definitely will be for the companies because as a profitable money making machine, that they're going to want to automate a lot of things. But for people in jobs, some of it's going to be good, some of it not so much. There'll be new jobs created. I just don't know that the ratio of new
Yeah.
jobs created will reflect how many jobs are being impacted.
And this is the challenge, right? Because what I'm trying to figure out is how can you automate jobs that we just won't have the workforce for? Like I think of quick service restaurant as an example. Do we need to bring in hundreds of thousands of new Canadians to fill those roles, or can we start automating a lot of it and leveraging those new Canadians for roles that actually drive value to the economy? And you might argue those jobs are value to the economy.
Mm.
I'm not 100% sure that is the case.
Yeah, but also automation is expensive. People say,
Yes.
oh, let's just automate it. But the reality is automation is
Oh, it's
expensive.
hard.
So it's a big investment a lot of times up front, and there's no guarantee. So if a restaurant today in Moncton was serving meals by a robot, I'm not sure how well it would do because I don't like. I think in some markets to be like you think about Japan, you mentioned Japan. Well, Japan's from a technology and optics, like they've been doing this for like 20, 30 years. They've been fascinated with robot and technology, and it's part of the culture. So I think it's a much easier transition. I'm pretty sure if Subway starts serving food through robots, or maybe any restaurants really, I don't know if that would be.
But we've seen it in the US with there's a couple of companies that are like flipping chicken wings and things like
Yep,
this
making pizza.
automated. I agree, but I think part of the discussion here is yes, it's expensive, but this is where the government comes in. If you're going to invest in something that kind of future proofs what we do, and it might not work, I'll tell you, we have wasted way more money than that.
The government's not going to go and do that. And then, okay, this robot who doesn't pay tax is going to replace 5 people who pays taxes. That's really what it comes down to. So that's the balance that governments are trying to strike is okay, how can we do that, but also without necessarily eating our own tails?
Oh, it's not an easy job. So let's agree on that. I would not want to be the next prime minister because I don't have the answers, but I think there's little things that we can do. So, on that note, episode 10, Beacon
We finally
finally
got
got
here.
smooth sailing from now on. So, the next time I mention at what episode we're at, it'll be at 100.
That's awesome. I can't also wait to do this animation.
Yeah, I
Future
sounds
of
great.
work.
So, Yves, it's always a pleasure to talk work with you. So,
You too, Serge. Take care. Au revoir.
au revoir.